Oh, would you turn the lights on, Sally? Just flip all the switches up. Thank you. Good morning, everybody. Once again, welcome. This morning I will be talking about seclusion, which is a word that comes up a lot in the sutras. It sounds a small word, but there's actually a lot packed in there. So if you are familiar with the Pali Suttas, it is not uncommon when there's an instruction on meditation for the sutta to begin find a place of seclusion, to go to the root of a tree or an unoccupied dwelling, secluded from sensual pleasures and unskillful states of mind. So that's where a lot of this starts. So I'm going to talk about this seclusion, what this seclusion is, dive a little deeper into what it is, talk about working with it, working towards it, and then hopefully I get to a point where we can circle back and make a kind of a deeper connection about seclusion. So that's where I'm going today. So seclusion. Start by going to the root of a tree or to an unoccupied dwelling. This is go off on your own somewhere. Go somewhere quiet. And we can think of the ancient mendicants Buddha and his crowd, who were just wandering around and they were doing this all the time. Well, they actually weren't doing this all the time. This wasn't their steady state, because there's an act of go to. Monastics aren't in that state. Go to. There's the rain retreat. So if you follow the story of the monks, what would happen is they'd all go off, they'd go into the villages and they'd beg for food together, and then they'd go back, they'd have this collective gathering with the food, they'd express gratitude for the food, they'd all eat, and then they'd all go off to their trees or their roots or their unoccupied dwellings, right? Mm-hmm. So they'd all go to seclusion. And then on a larger scale, they'd be wandering all over the place, interacting with people. And then the rain season would come. And every year, for about 3 months, they'd all go off to seclusion. So it's not a permanent state. There's an act of going to seclusion that's a really important part of this. And I think it's important to remember this going to as part of the act. Unoccupied dwelling, sure. Base of a tree. Buddha talked a lot about meditating in nature. It's not. There are parts of the country where that's much easier than others. In the south is not so easy, because in the summer it is really, really hot. In the summer, if you're not careful, it is really, really, really full of mosquitoes. There is a story, I forget which one it was, but there's I think he was 17th century, a Japanese monk, mendicant, somebody who's talked about as a Japanese Zen guy. And he used to sleep in a tent and he'd stick one leg out every night, and he said that one's for the mosquitoes. So I don't think we all want to do that, right? So and then in the winter it's cold. But there is something really nice about meditating in nature. Go on a hike, go up to a waterfall and just meditate for a little bit. You can do it, and there's something really special. I like to meditate when I'm indoors with the windows open. There's mesh so mosquitoes don't come in, and it's climate controlled indoors mostly. But there's an interaction orally with nature there. You can hear much better. And there's somehow or other, when you open the windows of the car, it's not just the noise. There's an openness to energy that happens when you remove barriers between yourself and the outside world. So this root of the base of the tree really is about, it's really an important part of this. There's a point of connecting to nature. It's part of this. Secluded from sensual pleasures, secluded from unskillful states of mind. So sensual pleasures, taste, touch, sight, smell, etc. Unskillful states of mind. There's a number of different ways of getting to it. Well, actually, I'll spend more on sensual pleasures first. Secluded from sensual pleasures. When we're walking around, when we're engaging with the world, our body is naturally alert to the world. It has to be tuned in because its function is survival. Its function is engaging with, interacting with, and taking advantage of and protecting from the world. So if we're up and about, we are naturally engaged. Our peripheral vision is engaged, looking for movement. Our ears are there all the time, listening for noise, listening for alarms. And our senses, our sense of touch is just engaged. So this seated meditation posture is a great way of being secluded from sensual pleasures. It is designed to let us sit still, let the senses settle down, and settle down to where there's a very low level of background noise we notice. And that is conducive to this whole practice of deeper seclusion that we'll get into in a minute. But this seated meditation posture is really an absolute boon to this practice that we're all here for. If you go back and you look at the roots of the yoga tradition, and particularly the commentaries on the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, a lot of that is focused on asanas, and we think of like tree pose and plank pose and inverted dogs and all the rest of them. But if you go back to the old teachings and the older commentaries, most of the postures, most of the asanas are varieties of seated meditation postures. You right now are in an asana. An asana is a physical form where you are still, steady, and holding energy. These asanas is designed as ways of just holding an energy posture. It's physical, but it's also energetic. And if you sit a lot, you'll find at some point, you're sitting cross-legged, your legs get tired, and so you decide to kneel. Or you decide to kneel. For me, when I first started doing this, I didn't understand it, but I'd go on a Zen retreat and I'd sit cross-legged for a couple of days, and then my legs would really get sore, and I'd kneel. I'd just disappear. Just gone. And then I'd come back and I'd sit cross-legged and back to normal. So these asanas, and then if you sit on a chair, I find it functionally very different sitting on a chair. They're all poses that are worthy of exploration, and different poses work for different people. Different asanas work in different ways for different people, but they are different. So it's actually worth, as a matter of meditation practice, of Buddhist practice, actually worth exploring different seated postures. I mean, I can actually, this one here, full lotus, you probably can't see it, but I've started doing that a little bit, and it's amazing. It's just absolutely different, and somehow or other, when I sit in this posture with my feet, soles of my feet up, there's energy right here. So this is like, what do they call it, the Earth Star chakra? I don't know, maybe that's what this is, but there's something very different in that pose. So explore different postures. This is seclusion from sensual pleasures. Seclusion from unskillful states of mind. One of the ones that's talked about a lot is the 5 hindrances: greed, anger, or ill will, restlessness and anxiety, sloth and torpor, and doubt. Those are the 5 hindrances, and there are teachings on how to work with those, because those are obstacles that come up. We're sitting, and thoughts of, I really liked that movie. Beth and I went to see the Martin Scorsese movie last night, so I really liked that. And so I've seen Martin Scorsese for a long time, go leafing through some search on Google and find half a dozen Martin Scorsese movies, and let's go on Amazon and buy a few of these. Greed. And so I sit here thinking about, well, maybe I'll watch Raging Bull tonight. That would be cool, wouldn't it? Greed, just showing up. It happens all the time in different ways for all of us. And that's an unskillful state of mind. So there's a creation of a self, a creation of a clinging, and the 4 Noble Truths. Suffering, the cause of suffering, the end of suffering, and the way to end it. The cause of suffering is precisely this. It is our craving. It's when we get stuck on something and we engage with it. That's the cause of our suffering. So these are unskillful states of mind. Another way to approach this unskillful states of mind and this seclusion from unskillful states of mind is to think of unskillful states of mind as being those which feed the ego, those which feed the formation of mental fabrications, feed the formation of fabrication, mental and physical fabrications. And in the Pali teaching, there are 4 nutriments. The 4 nutriments are food, like bread and apples and whatever. So food, then
I'm sorry, I thought I turned it off.
so food is one. I'm missing one. We'll get there. The third one is intellectual intent, and the 4th one is consciousness. So these are the things that come in and out of which we form ourselves. These are the things we get stuck on. So I'm going to jump over to Zen for a minute, because we think about, Zen is just jump straight in. Right? No instructions, no nothing. One of the, Dogen is the founder of the Soto Zen sect in Japan. His years were, I think, 1300 to 1350, something like that. 1200 to 1250, 13th century. 1200 to 1250, something like that. And one of his pieces was Fukanza Zengi, which is instructions on seated meditation. And much of the time what is quoted from that is eyes horizontal, nose vertical. So it's just sitting. That's it. So it's just eyes horizontal, nose vertical. Really simple. It's a page and a half. He says a little bit more than that. He says a little bit more than that. At the beginning he says, or early on he says, eat and drink in moderation. This is an instruction to manage that food nutriment. So we have to eat, but he's saying eat and drink in moderation. So don't get stuck on it. Don't do it for pleasure. Don't do it with a real sense that there's something going on. You do it just to the extent that's necessary to keep this going, so it can practice. Eat and drink in moderation. Then he says something like, actually I wrote these down, so they're in here somewhere. Here we go. So I'll also remember the 4th one of these. Oh, contact. So it's food, contact, intellectual intention, and consciousness. Put aside all involvements and suspend all affairs. Put aside all involvements and suspend all affairs. That's cutting off contact. Contact is generally with the physical senses, but it also happens with mind. Contact is that from which we get a feeling of, this is nice, well, this is not so nice. And that then leads into the whole spiral of I want more, I want less, clinging, craving, and becoming, right? And he's saying, put aside all involvements and suspend all affairs. This is Dogen, the sect that gives you no instruction at all and says just sit. But even there, do this. And then, give up the operations of the mind, intellect, and consciousness. The 4 nutriments, the 3rd and the 4th, are intellectual intention and consciousness. All of these move up, jump into, if you're familiar with it, the 12-link chain of causation, they go on up through name and form and so forth. But he's saying, give up operations of mind, intellect, and consciousness. That's give up engaging in those other nutriments. Very clear instructions with which Dogen begins this piece about just sit are refrain from the 4 nutriments. The 4 nutriments. Stop feeding this monster. Because if you feed it, it becomes a monster. It really does. And we know it because that's when it gets really big, we're really unhappy. We're really stressed. When there's a problem at work and it's taken over, we fed this monster, it's really big, and we are miserable. And we're probably making people around us miserable too. Don't feed it. So the net we go on back to the Pali thing. From there we go into the J word, the 4-letter Pali word for Buddhists, jhanas. It's actually not 4 letters, but people just don't like talking about jhanas. Some people really nerd out on the jhanas. Let's be honest, there are people who really nerd out on jhanas, but many people don't like talking about them because they don't understand them. They're kind of scary. They're intimidating. I've not experienced them, so there must something wrong with me, and I don't want to go. There's lots of reasons, but they're really important, and they are made far more complicated than they need to be. The jhanas are simply a description of concentration. That's all they are. They're a description of concentration. And they're a description of concentration made by somebody who has experienced a variety of different concentration states and is simply saying, this is what this one's kind of like. So it's a milestone for you. It's a milestone's wrong. It's a marker. It's just a post on a map that tells you kind of what they look like. So the first of the jhanas is joy and pleasure born of seclusion, accompanied by vitakka and vikara, which are usually translated as applied and sustained thought, something like that. So joy and pleasure, these are physiological sensations, physiological and mental sensations of pleasure. They're pleasant, accompanied by, let's say, investigation. Noticing and investigation. That's what vitakka and vikara is all about. It's about investigation. It's about the skill of looking and examining. So in this place of seclusion, the root of the tree or the unoccupied dwelling, we settle down. There's this physiological sensation that we can notice, and in that state we are examining. And then what happens, that examining becomes a concentration. There's another word that's difficult, that's often misunderstood. Ekagata is often translated as single-pointed, but it's more of it's a single focus, and it's a single field. It's not being distracted all over the place. It's coming to a stable place. Really being present with what's happening. It's not focusing on the tip of a pin. It's focusing more on a nebulous area within which your examination is going on. So the second one is joy and pleasure born of concentration, not of seclusion. First one is seclusion. Second one is born of concentration, and that's it. The mind has stopped, folks. This thinking monster has stopped. And what happens, and it does happen naturally if you do it long enough, and there are things you can do to encourage it. What happens if we follow this path into seclusion, and then we settle down and we really start paying attention, investigating the arising of mind, investigating states of mind. Is this skillful? Is it not skillful? If it's not skillful, let's let it go. If it's skillful, let's nurture it. Let's do a little bit more of that. If we do that work, then the thinking mind stops all on its own, because that concentration, that kind of concentration, just naturally brings the thinking mind to an end. And you'll notice it's gone. And then you start thinking about it being gone, and you'll be back, and you bob up and down, right? But it's just what happens. And this pleasure and joy that we're talking about here, this pleasure and joy, it does just naturally arise as we settle into this seclusion. And we can help this whole process by noticing it. It can be in the palm of your hands, can be in your belly, can be in your throat. But as we settle, there's the subtle body, you start tuning into away from the gross senses and into more subtle senses and a subtle body. And this subtle body, there'll be an area of warmth or pleasure or just something nice, and you can notice that, and you can place your energy and attention there. And this is part of this vitaka and vikara. It's part of this investigation that's applied. You notice that, and you kind of breathe on it. And of course, you're not taking oxygen and blowing it in there, but that's not what the Buddha was talking about when he talked about breathing anyway. He was talking about this energy breathing. Yes, that's part of it, but that's only part of it. If you really settle into your breathing, you can feel the whole body breathing. So you find that place where it's pleasant, and you can breathe gently into that, and you can warm that up a little bit and spread it, and you can help this pleasure fill the body. And that's actually one of the tricks that makes this practice work, which is once we start noticing these more subtle pleasures, they're far nicer than a bowl of ice cream or a junk movie. They really are. And that's the bait. It's like we sit, and as long as it's hard work, it's hard work. And then at some point we realise, oh, this is really nice. Let's stay here. It's really nice. And it's part of what's happening in a practice. Part of what you're doing. That's a skillful way of practicing, because it is recognising that what we normally think of as wonderful in the world with sense pleasures actually isn't so cool after all. This kind of more settled place is much more pleasant. And in and of itself, and because from this more settled space, the story of the office, which starts to spiral and becomes this monster that we're feeding, is much less likely to happen. We're much more likely to interrupt it before it gets out of control. So this is a little bit about where we go with this seclusion, and the why and the what. There are, if you go through the jhanas, there are 4 of them, and then there's 4 immaterial jhanas. So there's a whole bunch more I could go through, but this is enough for what I want to do today. I'm going to bring it back to Dogen again, because if you keep on going through Fukan Zazengi, he talks about thinking, not thinking. And this is turned into some sort of complicated koan, and if you get stuck on the words, it can be. But it's really, again, not as difficult, not as complicated as it sounds. Thinking, not thinking, is just exactly what I just described, where the mind stopped, and it does it of itself. And I suspect, even if this hasn't happened to folks on the cushion as you've been sitting and settled and found the mind stopping, I suspect you've all had times in your life where your mind has stopped. It's my favourite list of things. Being in the room when a baby's born, standing on the rim of the Grand Canyon and watching the sunrise. These moments where we experience, my sister had one the first time she ever went to the Magic Kingdom in Disney World. We went through there, there's the Sleeping Beauty's castle and palace and all, and her jaw just dropped. And she was in awe for 2 or 3 minutes, just completely transported. Which I completely get. But I suspect it can happen in lots of different places. But I suspect you've had these moments where mind has stopped. And then it comes back and you think, well, that's good because that's who I am. You're not. That's not who you are. That's the trick. Your mind tells you that's who you are, and you're not. Something I read, and I wish I could place it, but this is a quote from a book I read many years ago. True freedom is freedom from your own mind. Economic, political, and social freedoms are all freedoms of limited kind. True freedom is freedom from your own mind. Thinking, not thinking. Joy and pleasure born of concentration. True freedom is freedom from your own mind. So bringing it back, this seclusion that we're looking for, actually I would posit, is really seclusion from our own mind. We're so caught up in our minds, we sit and we get away from all the outside noise, and then a leaf blower goes up and we go out and meet the leaf blower, and you hear planes going over the top, or music coming from Shelapan over the street. And we engage with this, and it's like, wish that would stop. This is our mind. It's not us, it's our mind. True freedom is freedom from that. True seclusion is seclusion from that. So the base level of the practice is finding seclusion, and this is, it's going down a couple of levels into the jhana. It's going into the fourth or the fifth paragraph of Fukunza's Engi rather than just the introductory. But it's part of that stage of setting the foundation for our practice. And once we touch that seclusion from our mind, that freedom from our mind, and we see it for what it is, we start to see who we really are. We start to see the peace that is there. That becomes more something we can touch on as we're walking down the street or a car cuts in front of us. And it becomes something much more grounding in our practice, and we become more familiar with going there. It just becomes more habitual to come home to who we are. So seclusion, not so much as going to the root of the tree, although that's where we start, not so much as winding down the windows of the car or opening the window when you sit, but seclusion is seclusion from your own mind.